What's that? Who there? Whoa.
Hey guys, it's Kallaway. Hope everyone's doing well. In an effort to try to get this crispy video that you see behind me, we're experimenting with some new settings and a new player called Riverside. And unfortunately, the video did not record for this next episode. But we have Taylor's video and the audio sounds crispy, so we still wanted to make sure we played it. In the meantime, we'll just throw up a graphic and we'll be back in episode 37 with video on my side. Thanks. Enjoy the show. Taylor, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Kyle. I'm super excited to chat with you.
Yeah, I'm so stoked to go through Toucan and learn more about your background. So I think, the way I love to start these is just with a snapshot of the company. So can you just give us like the quick rundown of what Toucan is, what you do, kind of what the mission is?
Yeah, of course. So we're a free browser extension that you install and we teach you a new language. And so if you're using Twitter, Medium, like going down Reddit rabbit holes, we switch out keywords and phrases for you to contextually immerse yourself, whether you're trying to learn Spanish, French, Portuguese, or whatever it actually is.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think the technology is brilliant. And to be honest, it's one of those things you're like surprised that someone hadn't come up with before, but I'm really glad you guys took it on.
Thanks.
Yeah, just to start, I'd love to get into your background. So you have a really fascinating background. I was reading your LinkedIn. You taught yourself to code. You've built apps. You've led partnerships at places like Headspace and Science, and then now have founded Toucan. So as fast or as slow as you'd like, just take us through the run through of your background and kind of the twists and turns that it's taken.
Yes, it's definitely had a lot of twists and turns over the years, but born and raised in Los Angeles, went back east for school, upstate New York, freezing cold Ithaca, studied just communication business, super broad. I've always had a lot of my own ideas, but I didn't really know what I was going to go into. During the summers, I had internships at Vogue and GQ and Teen Vogue, thought I was going to go into fashion, but it was very much Devil Wears Prada. So it didn't fit me that well. And then I found myself loving hospitality because Cornell has an amazing hospitality program. And I worked in our student-run restaurant and bar, from being a dishwasher to the manager and everything in between. But realized hospitality wasn't quite for me. And I kept hearing about tech, but for whatever reason, engineering wasn't quite marketed towards me. But I've always had these ideas. So I started using YouTube as my own teacher, taught myself how to code to be dangerous enough to build any of my ideas, and really stumbled upon tech when I came back to Los Angeles and joined Headspace. Perfect timing possible. There was sub 20 employees. We hadn't yet raised a formal funding round. There was so much open white space. And I joined. We scaled from 20 employees to 300 employees, scaled pre-funding past the Series B. And as you mentioned, I led a lot of the different distribution activities. So really, how do we scale Headspace without paid acquisition, which is a really great skill set to now have building your own company. And took those learnings, jumped to start my own thing. I have 3 failures under my belt already. So it took a lot of learnings from each of my full-time jobs to jump into a project that I created my own, with the most recent being I was at Fair with one of my co-founders, and we joined pre-SoftBank, putting in a mere $350 million into the company, and then scaled that rocket ship as well. So a lot of different experiences in LA tech.
Yeah, and I'd love to double click into some of those before we get into Toucan. So, the first, I think being able to code is such a secret weapon. And I imagine this whole time you've been kind of like toying with side projects that you've experimented with. And you mentioned a couple of, failures. You sure learned a lot in each of those, but I'd love you to just walk through what were some of those, what were the different problems you were solving, and how far did you get?
Yeah, sure. And why I even taught myself how to code was I had tried to recruit a technical co-founder who I did not know and was a complete stranger. And as you can imagine, it ended miserably. So then I was like, whatever I build next, I want to be dangerous enough to get way smarter people excited about what I'm building so then they can come on and help build it out. But just used a bunch of YouTube videos to be able to do that. One of them was called Simba. It was a dog app. When I got my golden retriever, I noticed there was this magic moment of if the dogs played together, they were exhausted the rest of the day. But there's this weird thing where you know all of the dog names, but you don't know the owner's name. And you're not really going to ask them for their phone number. And so it was this app that allowed you to set a status and then very easily see where people were so that they could connect in real time. And then another project was called Lancer. It was really Glassdoor for freelancers. Went out, pitched probably 200 VCs with one of my now co-founders. Everyone hated the idea, tore it apart, but they loved us as a team. And it was a really great moment for us to understand what the fundraising process looks like, but also start building those relationships with investors.
Yeah. And so for something like Lancer, like what other than 200 people saying no and not being able to fund it, like what were the decision criteria that you and your co-founder used to be like, all right, we need to stop? Because you hear all these people say, all you have to do is not quit, you'll eventually be successful. And you could say, I guess you guys pivoted into Toucan more or less, but like what was the decision criteria you used to determine when to close the doors on that?
Yeah, and such a good point too, because even with fundraising for Toucan, so many people told us why we're going to fail miserably, right? And so it's really about creating a bunch of hypotheses and then proving things right or wrong. So for Lancer, it was us talking to users, which in that case was freelancers, and like, hey, would this be valuable? Is this information good enough for you? What does this look like on the client employer side? And everyone just kept giving us feedback of like not really in love, not really excited. Even the feedback we were getting, we were like, I don't think that this is the one. If we were really honest with ourselves, like we knew in our gut after digging deeper that it wasn't the one and the right project for us.
Yeah. And that's got to be one of the hardest feelings to, I'm sure you put a year or two into that and to try to like eat that and move on. Like that's pretty tough.
Yeah, and really just try to take the learnings from it to make the next time better. But yeah, it's always sad putting one of your babies to rest.
Yeah, for sure. So I also wanted to double click on this idea around like BD and partnerships, which you spent a lot of time in different roles at different tech companies on. And so, you know, in Headspace in particular, you said you led the partnerships at Nike, Spotify, Uber, these massive companies. And so I'd love to learn from you, like when you think about partnerships and specifically those ones, how did you approach those deals? And like, you know, behind the scenes, what is it like negotiating a partnership with those big brands and what are some learnings you took away?
Yep. So I'm definitely a professional stalker, but in the least creepy way possible. But even as such a small company as Headspace was at that point of time, and yet again, there was not yet 1,000 meditation apps out there. Meditation was not yet even part of pop culture or something that we were talking about. How could we approach these big companies and provide value that they're not getting themselves? A great example of this was Spotify. Like massive company, massive audience. What would they need from a little meditation company? But what they could need is, if you look at their monthly subscription, that's all the revenue that they're getting. It's predictable, but how do they increase that revenue? Like, what if you could bundle two amazing products together for the price of one and also lock users in more and decrease churn for both products because now they're tied in for both? And so that was the awesome value prop that allowed us to start those conversations with Spotify. Similar idea, but totally different value prop was when I started approaching airlines like JetBlue, Delta. Went after one airline first and were like, hey, you have amazing entertainment in your in-flight entertainment consoles, like movies, TV shows, music. Are you helping people learn a new skill? Like, could you turn that dead time into useful time and help people learn how to meditate? And they're like, oh, really interesting. Like, let's give it a shot. And we were able to include like promo codes at the end of the videos, which we could then track the successfulness. Once we're like, okay, this is working, then I went out and got every airline.
Yeah, that's amazing. And for like that Spotify deal, was it, you know, like the way you explain it, super simple, obviously upside for them and you know, what's the downside when you're not really taking like share of music listen per se because it's meditation's kind of a different category. Was it pretty easy for them to say like, all right, let's try this?
Nothing's easy getting anything done with a massive company, right? Like, lots of red tape, lots of negotiation, even us internally trying to understand, like, does a bundle cannibalize existing potential new subscribers? But being the scrappy company, we were like figuring out how to move fast and test a lot of things on our end to move quicker than otherwise a big company might. And we're taking a lot of that, and as we're looking at how can Toucan partner with some big companies and the massive players in the space, like a Duolingo or a Babbel or a Rosetta, how can we do a lot of the heavy work so we can move quick in order to execute these partnerships?
Yeah, that partnership angle is definitely something I wanted to talk about today. Before we get there, though, I think it would be helpful just give us a rundown of how the Toucan product works. So, it's a browser extension that allows you to learn new languages, but just give the spiel for the audience that hasn't seen it before.
Of course. So if you're reading a TechCrunch article or a New York Times article, the word coffee will be translated in line to Spanish or whatever language you're trying to learn. And so you'll have these tidbits of phrases, words, vocabulary learning translated in line throughout your day, no matter what web page you are. And what that allows you to do, and us to also do, is as you continue using the product, it's going to progressively get more difficult. So we'll show you maybe coffee. We'll start to understand that you got it, like you've got it. Now we give you hot coffee. So you can start to understand gender or pluralization with cold coffees. And then we'll start to upgrade you to phrases. So what does it look like to then show you what grammar is around or verb conjugations? And that's really like the end state that we're working towards. But in addition to these inline translations, we've just launched some of our first portals around what we're calling mini games. And there are quizzes or games that you can imagine. And our first one's on Wikipedia. So if you go to any Wikipedia page, you can opt in to like play a game with us to use some of your deeper learning, test your skills, see where you are on the progression side. And what's so cool about being an extension is that's our first portal, but two portals coming next that we're working on right now is, say you're on Facebook newsfeed, scrolling, you're seeing a bunch of your friends' posts, their kids, dogs. We can overtake one of those posts and give you a mini game to engage with instead. Or you're on YouTube watching a bunch of music videos that just dropped, advertisement starts playing. We can detect that has started playing and now give you a quiz to engage with it instead. So our positive spin on ad blocker.
That's awesome. Yeah, it seems so untapped. Like I think the reason why I'm so excited about it is I feel like the browser extension market is super under leveraged, like from a distribution vehicle perspective, because the toughest thing today, right, is getting consumer behavior to not change. Like you want to go in line with consumer behavior. So when you make someone download a new app, you're forcing them to go away from something else. But what you guys have done really brilliantly, I think, is you've just layered on top of something that's already existing. And that's awesome.
Exactly. And I think that's why us as a founding team are the ones to build this and why it might not have existed before, because we come from the best consumer tech companies in Los Angeles. And through those years of experience, we know how hard it is to get anyone to do anything, right? Even Headspace was just 10 minutes to sit there, basically do nothing, right? And we had all the science and research to show people why this was so good for them. That with Toucan, we're like, why would we try to compete for time? Because you're not just competing against friends, family, work, and school, but also Netflix, Spotify, Instagram, Headspace, and everything in between. We're like, let's not do that. Instead, let's intentionally layer on top of existing behaviors and meet people where they already are.
Yeah. And so I'd love you to dive into like the Inception story, because I'm curious, and I'm sure a lot of people are like, given that you've pursued other things, were you just looking for something that worked? And when you found this kernel, you were like, let's double down? Or do you have like a specific tie to this particular problem? And either way is completely fine, but I'd love to get your perspective on that.
So a few different things. One, all three of us co-founders have always learned languages growing up. I have 10 years under my belt Spanish, but all I have to show for it is donde está la biblioteca. Like, why did I take 10 years? But that's all I remember. And that's Spanish 101 for so many people. And I know Portuguese fluently. It's what I'm learning with Toucan also. But just learning languages, traveling, culture, education has always been something that we wanted to work on. And like, how do we crack this? Because the idea that you could spend 10 years learning something but not remember it, or like buy something for $1,000 and it just sits on a shelf and you don't really learn. Like, was there a way to crack this? And we just had this initial idea of like, let's layer on top of behaviors, but also let's test and talk to users. So V1 of Toucan was, if you can imagine the word the, being translated every single time on your webpage. Like in Spanish, that was it. Terrible user experience.
Yeah, they're like, I don't like this.
So bad. We were laughing, but we got it in front of people in coffee shops. Like, hey, what do you think? Is there magic here? Like, what are you thinking? And everyone was like, this is so cool. And we're like, if this is terrible and it's cool, like there's something here for us to keep building hypotheses, proving things right or wrong, and just testing and iterating. And honestly, as we kept doing that, the idea got bigger. We're like, okay, there's something massive here. Like this could be an iconic company.
Yeah, what's interesting, and I was listening to a couple of your other interviews. I don't think Toucan's like a learning language company. I think it's a learning company, and like it's easy to see. Like, let's say financial education was something you wanted to tackle. You're reading an article, and then similar to how like certain sites have words highlighted and you can see the definition, but there's a way to build that much more dynamically with what you guys have shown. So it's super fascinating. Is that kind of the direction you feel like you're going past languages?
For sure. Like right now we're a small team, so we're laser focused on languages. But in the back of our mind, we have, okay, as we attack other content verticals later down the line, how does this like quiz or this mini game or these like hover for more transfer over to other content verticals so that we are able to like grow into that big, massive vision?
Yeah. And so being someone that has, like you said, tried to raise money before, the ins and outs of when you go to investors, right? You're trying to understand market size and the opportunity and analyze the space. And so I love talking to founders about, when you got the spark and you had this kernel for the idea and you're like, wait, there's something here, you test it with consumers. How did you go about looking at the space, right? There's the Duolingos, the Babbels, et cetera. There's competitors there, but how did you look at it and what were the key factors that told you like, this is something we need to pursue?
Yeah, it's so interesting because when we went out to fundraise, like no one could really comp us to figure out who is Toucan's competitors because we have Toucan today, but also Toucan Big Vision. So they would look at Chrome extensions, so Honey, Grammarly as two of our major comps, and then also language learning apps, so Duolingo, Rosetta, Stone. From our perspective on the language learning side, we've always been like, how do we partner with all these people? Like if you are taking time out of your day to open an app every single day, that is amazing. If you're doing an in-person classroom or now virtual, right, with a textbook or using a tutor marketplace, we want to accelerate all of that learning. Like we will never, with our thesis of layering on top of behaviors, necessarily have our own standalone app, but we will layer on top of apps or partner with apps that exist out there. So we always saw them as partners in this space as we want to grow and scale and having those conversations. And then the extension side is interesting because there's no obvious use cases of language learning as an extension or overlay.
Yeah, that was my next question. So when I first saw it, my first thought was, okay, Duolingo does this, but in an app, and this is like a new way to do it. But then the more I thought about it, and I saw a tweet where you were like, let's partner with these companies, I got super intrigued because you're a partnerships expert, right? Like that's what you've been doing the last 10 years. And so I'd love to hear, like, pretend I'm Duolingo. Like, how are you pitching? How are you coming to me and saying, I'm not going to take your business, I'm going to partner with you and amplify it for both of us? Like, what's the pitch?
Yeah, so we're already speaking with all the teams. Each of them is actually a little different based off of what they're trying to accomplish, right? With Duolingo, it's fairly straightforward where like the progression that users are having within apps, we can now pair that as they're browsing. And so now they get this end-to-end engagement retention spectrum, right? And so it's not even just like, we'll give you some of our users and people are over you. They have like 500 million downloads total thus far, but they could really use help on retention. Like we know mobile apps have really poor retention and language learning apps are notorious for having terrible retention, right? But Toucan, we have world-class retention because we meet people where they are. So the two paired together now creates this amazing experience where we could send users to a co-branded landing page. They enter their Duolingo username. We can get all their progression that way. And now as they're browsing, the vocabulary that their people are learning that day, that week, that month can be prioritized and also signaled to the user and reinforced as they're browsing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm sure the way you structure it could be various ways, right? It could be like a license model where like they take the technology and you partner that way. It could be like a pure co-branded deal. I'm sure you guys are trying to figure that out.
Lots of different ways, and even like Rosetta Stone too, I think is interesting. So they're completely different, right? Where if you dig into their business, they're really funneling everyone into a lifetime subscription. But once you do that, there's not much revenue you can soak out of those users. And so for them, it's like looking at Toucan, how can we actually funnel all those users over to you guys and you give us a rev share based off of your subscription?
Totally. And that's an interesting kind of segue. So I wanted to talk about the business model. A lot of the founders I have on here, right, they're selling clothes. It's obvious, like they get revenue profit from the clothes and like some verticals. But for what you're doing right now, it's free. It's a free Chrome extension anyone can download. And I know you launched the Own Your Word thing, which was sick in my mind. Like that was a really creative way to like almost create scarcity around something that people use. And that I'm sure you have people pay for it and you help fund the company that way. But talk me through like the revenue model today and then kind of in the next 1 to 2 years.
Yeah, of course. So we technically do have a freemium subscription live right now. You have to dig within the product to find it. And even though no one can find it, people are still subscribing. So we take that as a really good sign that we can monetize via premium subscription. So actually, as we're speaking this sprint, the engineers are bringing out and like optimizing our freemium subscription where it's going to become more noticeable. And we'll put that threshold really on where people are asking for more, like more difficult vocabulary, more difficult learnings, like more density within the page, like more mini games, quizzes, and then really test and iterate around the freemium subscription. Like in the springtime, that will be paired with microtransactions. So think like anything to help you with learning and accelerate that learning. It's very similar to the mobile consumer app side where you have a subscription with in-app purchases, just bringing that over to the web. And then we'll have Own the Word continue going. Like we have more than 10,000 words have been purchased to date, which is pretty crazy. But if we really wanted to dive deep on it, it's essentially Google AdWords layered on top of Google for every web page domain available across the entire internet. So there's a lot of digital real estate that we can play around with.
Yeah, that's super fascinating. I'm sure when you paint that story to investors, they start to light up because there's so many ways you could go. I think,
Mm-hmm.
I guess one of the questions I would have is obviously the Chrome extension ecosystem is available to anyone. And I'm sure the language side of it is fairly proprietary and you guys have first mover, but like what would prevent anyone else from entering this Chrome extension landscape? Like what if they picked a different vertical and started chasing on the learning side?
Yeah. So massive opportunity. And I hope there's so many more use cases that get built out around the learning side. Because if you go to the Chrome store, there's not many learning like apps, extensions in general. But as we're building Toucan, there are a lot of moats that we're building into the business that are not noticeable on the surface. And it's similar to if you look at Grammarly or Honey, right? It looks like a toy on the surface, but the tech behind extensions are extremely complicated. And even just the fact that Toucan changes the physical look of every single site. When you try to do that, you break everything. Every website you can imagine, you break. And so if you really want to have a great user experience, they're going to have year and a half already under their belt to even catch up to us. And we still have bugs in the product that we're optimizing for. And then that's not even to mention the NLP tech that we're building on the language side, detection side. If you take the word orange, for instance, it could mean a color or a fruit. And so how does Toucan with 100% accuracy start to understand what it should be within the context of the page? And over time, like we are building the largest corpus, and I didn't know what that word meant, but like most up-to-date dictionary of how people are talking to each other because we are layered on top of Twitter, Facebook, Medium, which is like that in itself is extremely valuable IP.
Yeah, it's amazing. Something that's popping in my head that's really interesting. So like basically what you're doing is you're creating a customized N of one experience on a web page for everyone. So like if you go on it and I go on it, you'll see different things because your words will be different. What could be cool, completely separate business, but like inspired by this is you could create like personalized skins for every website. So like if I go to Google, it's like set up in a specific way. There's like modular things that I like, like all that is wide open, it seems.
For sure. There's so many use cases. Like I really, as a team, we created a dev community for browser extension builders. There's close to 150 of us in there, but just 150 engineers like that are building extensions so far. It's wild to me, the massive opportunity. Like one of our theses too with this extension side, and similar to what you mentioned, is huge distribution channel, completely overlooked and untapped. So much potential. And when I was pitching pre-Honey acquisition, like investors were like, go to market strategy extension. Like, I don't get it. After the acquisition, like my inbox got flooded. Just a really nice testament that this is possible and there's a lot of opportunity here.
Why do you think the Chrome extension marketplace has been so overlooked? Like obviously there's a bit of it where people just didn't even know that there was a way to build it. But then when Honey was big and even scaling pre-acquisition, it was pretty obvious that like they had figured something out. So why do you think there's been, that this low amount of attention?
A few things. If you're building a venture-backed company, investors' instinct is to ask you what's your mobile strategy. Like that is just like probably just pure repetition. They're looking at mobile strategy. This is future. What are you building on mobile versus really harnessing and understanding the potential of this as just even it on its own, you could build a massive $1 billion company as a Google Chrome extension. And that probably led to a lot of people not getting funded for building an extension. So a lot of it's side projects that are just running versus everything on the mobile app side. You see tons, thousands, millions of devs going there building. The other thing, there's not much documentation around building extensions. Like if you go to Stack Overflow, like iOS, Android, go to like type, you could probably learn how to say hello world building an extension, but anything besides that, really hard to dig up. But we actually have one of the co-founders of Honey on our cap table. And so that's been very useful as we've been building.
Yeah, I bet. that's like a secret weapon. So some questions around, or I guess one particular question around kind of struggles. And I think in the early days when you're building something, it seems like every little thing or some of the little things seem like huge things that are unsurmountable. And then once you get over them, you look back 5 years later, it's just a speed bump that was not even a problem. So you're like a year and a half in. What have been some of those struggles? And it's, people love when you're transparent about the good and the bad. So what are some of those struggles you've experienced so far and how do you kind of get over them?
So many. Nothing ever goes perfect in a startup. And even if people work as an employee in a startup, like everyone knows the crazy ups and downs that happen, right? I mean, even just the past 2 weeks, like as of today, I'm fully recovered, but I was completely knocked out, got COVID, like terrible, right? But was able to like lean on my co-founders, like, and the whole team too, to like keep running. But like, you don't plan for that to happen to yourself, but also like, COVID happened, global pandemic. We're a fragile like startup in March. Like what happened? Kind of like wartime CEO. I went out to raise a supercharger on for us and oversubscribed and closed it. But like these crazy moments you don't really plan for. But like really putting the foundation in on the team side, I think is really important. Because like then you have people you can lean on in the craziness of what happens. So like talk to my co-founders all the time if something poor was to happen, ask them for their advice, how to handle a situation. Like had crazy experiences with investors where they end up calling me to apologize for their behavior and having to like work through those situations too. So just a lot of different things. Nothing's ever perfect, especially in a high growth company.
Yeah, totally. I'd love to talk about kind of marketing and growth. I carve out this little section in the show where I talk to each founder about it because I'm just so fascinated by the different techniques and strategies that have worked and don't work. And so for you, the first question I have is around how you're acquiring customers. So you mentioned, and I totally believe, once you have a customer, it's super sticky because they're already in the browser. It's not, you don't like disrupt their current experience. In fact, you enhance it. So the retention is probably off the charts, like you mentioned. But from an acquisition perspective, what has been the playbook and some of the tactics that you've used to acquire customers?
Yeah. So one being a browser extension, Chrome, like it's a massive distribution on itself. People are organically finding us just searching in the Chrome store. So just being part of that ecosystem, and Google continues to keep featuring us, which gives us nice little organic lifts as well. While that's running, we've been building out different playbooks. One of them that you saw and mentioned was Own the Word. And so we saw our product as an amazing opportunity for people to own words and phrases within Toucan. So if you hover over the word coffee, Morning Brew newsletter owns it. If you hover over the word science, Bill Nye owns that word as well. And not only do big brands or celebs own words, but also our own user base does. And that is like a partnership heaven playground, because I can go talk to record labels and get their musicians to own words, or actors or TikTok influencers, or just like tech companies and everyone in between to own words and phrases. And anytime someone transacts, we give them a bespoke URL that people can share out on social that gives Toucan even more eyeballs into us. And so that was, I think, a really great way of us looking at our own product, at how can we leverage it for distribution, besides the typical ways you would think of referrals, gamification, product loops in general. And then we mentioned this next playbook that we're building out right now, but learning accelerators. How can we accelerate learning with massive partners that people are taking their time out to use?
Yeah, so and that's fascinating. I think there's the fact that people are searching in the Chrome store, finding you organically, and then sticking is unbelievable. Like the point you mentioned about how you built the freemium model and you hit it in the site, and people are still finding it. Like that's an amazing sign as well. I think this question that I love to ask founders is around 10x growth, and I'd love to get your take on it, given that you're growing fast, but still kind of in the early days per se. And so, if you were to think about like, and you may be thinking about this already, how do I 10x growth? How do I add a zero to the user base, go from 20,000 users to 200,000 in the next 24 months? Where do you think the opportunities are that are kind of untapped or underutilized for you right now? And how would you kind of invest the company's resources to do that?
Yeah. So exactly. That's the prize that I have my eyes set on. How do we scale to 1 million active installs this next year, which is like massive and ambitious in general for 1 year growth. But like we think we can hit it, and we think we can hit it organically too, which is massive. But what we want to be able to do, and what we're working on right now, is have that monetization piece in place so we can use it as a growth lever. So for instance, bundle partnership. If you're just a free product, or it's not obvious you're monetizing on a subscription, there's nothing to bundle, right? And work with a partner on that. Like rev share partnership. Can we kick back rev shares to people that are sending over our way? So really like these affiliate partners, whether it's a big, massive company or even like small YouTube influencers, because we have so much inbound right now of people wanting to promote Toucan, and they're doing it all organically. But I think there's a lot of opportunities too with other types of influencers or people or companies if we were able to lock in actual rev share deals. And that also allows us to test paid acquisition. We have yet to test paid acquisition. Like, what do those metrics look like for us? Is that even a vector we should go after? Because our experiences have told us like we can scale this thing organically, but that's another tool, another lever that we could pull if we really wanted to. But I think the biggest growth changes will be as we start unlocking language learning partnerships, like whether that's with textbook companies, with tutor marketplaces, or with these big mobile apps. Like that is where millions of existing users already are taking time out of their day to learn, that then Toucan is that no-brainer for them because they're already learning a language.
Totally. Yeah, that's awesome. It sounds like there's tons of untapped channels. So I want to shift to a couple of more like personal questions about your journey as a founder and some of your learnings, because I think this stuff is super fascinating, and people that are listening that are aspiring founders, I think, love hearing the different paths and learnings that you came across. So the first one is around like your career strategy, and I'm personally fascinated by this. I think I was surrounded by a lot of people who did undergrad, went to consulting, did the MBA route, back to consulting, et cetera. I just didn't think that was the right path for me. I think analyzing your path, you did your undergrad, you spent a lot of time in BD and partnerships. It seems like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you kind of picked that vertical as an area that you wanted to get dangerous. You jumped around different companies across different industries, all kind of in tech. And then on the side, you learned how to code and built your own things, and kind of developed those technical skills to be dangerous on that side. You didn't do the MBA, but you did this really cool program at USC around venture incubation. That's just what I took off your LinkedIn. But I'd love you to talk through, the way you think you've structured your career thus far, and any advice you have for someone who might be interested in startups and kind of just starting out mapping theirs.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because now looking back at my LinkedIn, it looks pretty masterful. Like I did it all with so much intent, but there are so many twists and turns. And any time I jumped from a company, it was like, oh shoot, am I doing a terrible thing? Like this is leaving me with no security, no salary, like nothing that allows me to be secure. But why I went the BD and partnerships route was it is so general, so broad. You basically get to do everything and anything within these high growth tech companies. And I knew I wanted to be a founder. So I wanted to soak up everything humanly possible while I was also adding value. And like now looking back at my resume, like probably never employable again because I've jumped around so much, having shorter stints, and will always be a founder and hopefully always be building Toucan specifically. But had the opportunity of like, let's stay as broad as possible, not get pigeonholed. And I also saw as I was in these high growth tech companies, you go from very broad specialized roles. And that's kind of where I faltered out and wanted to get that inkling to jump to do my own thing, because I realized like, I don't just want to be an employee or an exec at these tech companies. But like feel very lucky to have been able to use them as playgrounds to learn.
Yeah, totally. This other idea, I saw you tweeted about building in public, and building in public, this concept has become super popular lately. And I think, if you're starting out, it's a no-brainer to me because you get the kind of accountability and you're able to be radically transparent with the people that are following you. But B, it kind of serves as like an additional marketing channel for you because people kind of check in intentionally with people who are building in public to try to understand the progress and what you're doing. So I'd love you to just share, what are your thoughts about building in public? What are some of the other companies that you see doing that, or other founders that you're inspired by?
Yeah, so I definitely saw Austin from Lambda School, as well as Dom from Fast, like tweeting all the time, like doing it while they were building. I was like, this is pretty cool. Like I could send a tweet out, like one, get user feedback, access to new users, and then also like share my learnings as I'm going, because I am ruthless about my time and focusing on the team in general and scaling Toucan. But like this is a way I could potentially give back to the community at large. Like might not be interesting for every single person every day, but like maybe one tweet here and there. And all I commit myself to is sending one tweet 8 a.m. in the morning, like only on work days, like Monday to Friday. Don't necessarily do it on weekends, but it's like small enough, digestible enough that I can actually do it. And from it has come tons of users, like tons of investor interest. Like Baron Davis, two-time NBA All-Star, became an investor of Toucan. Like I didn't have access to Baron before that, but he found out about Toucan via Twitter. Like that's incredible. And then he tweeted about Toucan, sent us so many users, it crashed our website. He slid into my DMs. We had a conversation, and then he wanted to invest in Toucan right after that. Like that is the beauty of Twitter and the magic of it.
That's crazy. Yeah, I feel like so many people who have had success either founding startups, growing startups, or even creators with digital audiences, they all say just get in Twitter, get in the DMs with people that you didn't think you could access, and then they're super open and receptive.
Yeah, it's about like shooting your shot. Like what's the worst that's going to happen? They don't respond. That's totally okay. Someone will respond at some point. But yeah, I've really enjoyed doing it. I hope to keep doing it, and honestly keep being as transparent as possible, because to your point of like asking like what are the bad things that happen, a lot of time people don't lead with the bad things that are happening, but there are always bad things that are happening. And so like what are the learnings that you can share transparently while still maintaining that you are building a business. There are like competitive learnings that like need to be held protective, but like what can you give back to the community with?
I like how you're regimenting it too, like one time on weekdays in the morning. Because I feel like some of these people, like us and Dom, these people are tweeting all day. Like I have no idea how they're getting work done, but they're super active on Twitter.
I asked the same question. So yeah, I'm just sticking to one a day. I don't think I can go as hard as them.
Yeah, I thought maybe they were like programming their tweets on like Hype Fury or something, but it
Oh.
seems like they're in the responses as well. So I don't know, some kind of magic time management for sure. So another topic I want to talk about is hiring, and I think I've asked this on most of the conversations I've had before. What are the qualities you're looking for? But I think what I realized is almost every founder has similar answers, right? You want people who are versatile, who are self-starters, et cetera. And I think the more interesting question on that is, what is the process that you use to find the superstars that you found? Like, how do you suss out the BS from the authenticity?
So I can give you the process on our first three engineers because it's more interesting than our most recent three engineers. The most three recent engineers, amazing, talented people, but they were also at Headspace with us. And so they've known us for the past 7+ years and have come around with Toucan round two. So they've already been in our network that we kind of work. The first three engineers and really our first three hires, we had to convince really strangers to come join us on this journey where there were so many unknowns. And what I did was I stalked all of Los Angeles engineers on LinkedIn, started adding people that fit our profile around our technologies, but didn't include a note because adding a note is very creepy on LinkedIn. When people started accepting me, I could grab their personal email because I could figure out their work email, but I'm not going to email them about a job to their current workplace. But you can't guess a personal email. So you really need that LinkedIn sign up because everyone signs up to LinkedIn with their personal email. So once they accept it, I could grab that. And then the email template I was doing was not necessarily asking them if they were interested, but asking for referrals. And so they naturally started thinking of themselves. And the three of them got this referral email and they offered up themselves to be interviewed.
Very interesting. I like that. That's savvy. That's coming from a BD and partnerships lead right there. You've
Yeah.
done that before. That's awesome.
Yep. Just a few times.
And then, so then when you're interviewing them, obviously engineers, it's a little harder because it's technical and it's usually like, do they have the chops or not? And then culture fit. But have you had to hire any non-engineers yet?
Yeah, we have. Actually, just one recently. So fairly similar process, just not on the tech screen side. So what we'll do is the hiring manager, whoever is, will do a phone call, like initial screen, like are they fitting even the chops to take time out of our team's very busy days, right? And then if it's like a yes, like super excited about this person, has a lot of potential, then we'll do a team screen. And so it'll be like 3 different teams and the key stakeholders from the team across the org. And we're recently 12 team members, so still like small, nimble, but enough to like get, I think there were 6 people that interviewed her total. Just to get like a lot of different opinions. And even though she was a non-technical role, we had the engineers interviewing her to really understand not just like culture fit, which you mentioned, but we're looking for culture add because we don't want a lot of the same people that fit in together. Like, how do we make this more diverse, get different opinions, new people into the mix that we don't necessarily have from our existing networks too?
Yeah, that's a really good point. It sounds like it's been fairly successful. So keep up those referral emails are awesome.
Thank you.
A couple questions around funding. So the first one, you mentioned you've had a lot of pitches for this business, previous businesses. I'd love for you to share, what are the biggest lessons learned you've taken away from an investor pitch, good or bad, that you've kind of carried on and will carry forward?
So many lessons. We could do a whole thing just on fundraising specifically. A few things, like I don't use a pitch deck when I fundraise or talk to investors. I keep it super conversational, just like what we're doing, like questions back and forth, allowing them to double click where they're most interested, right? And like let them ask questions so that they're more invested in what we're doing. I'll obviously start with like 5-minute intro, get them really excited, pumped on us in general, but most of the rest of it is conversation. Always with new investors, like warm intros. A lot of investors say cold intros and they'll answer, but almost from my own experience, I've noticed it's like a mark of a first challenge accomplished. So like before I went out to fundraise our first round, I met with every single founder that would speak with me in Los Angeles specifically, just because I knew I could get in-person FaceTime and build that relationship. And then after that, I would use it as pitch practice, have them poke holes in my pitch, get that repetition under my belt, but also ask them for warm intros. And those warm intros from people on their cap table that they trust. So that led to even better relationships for me. And I actually got a lot of angel money out of that too, which was another good signal for us starting. And then other learnings, like run an actual process. Like what I do to create momentum and build a market for our stock is to have back-to-back meetings. So I'll do like 8 meetings a day, compress time in like 3 to 4 weeks to get multiple term sheets and then close it out quickly.
Okay. That's awesome. And you've raised just the first kind of seed round, or did you do a second round as well?
So we've raised $3.5 million to date. We've been very like humbled by the amount of interest. And I mentioned Baron Davis, but also LinkedIn CEO Jeff Weiner. Those two recently came in. Wasn't a formal round. We weren't looking to fundraise, but we have that type of opportunistic investors that want to be part of Toucan. Like you just don't say no.
Yeah, that's amazing. So another question in this area I have for you, I saw another tweet you threw out there around like letting consumers invest and like users invest. And this is a topic where I feel like there hasn't been enough innovation. I think if you're like an everyday person, there's a couple ways you could invest. One way, you could be a accredited investor and then try to beg to get into a round. It's usually not going to work unless you have some kind of differentiated offer. The other option you could try is investing in someone else's rolling fund who's high profile, but you have to be accredited for that as well. And so then, the third, you're kind of left with these crowdfunding platforms, which are awesome, the technology, but a lot of the major players, like the big name A players, are not on those crowdfunding platforms. They don't allocate a piece of their round. So, what are your thoughts on this? And do you feel like what do you think should exist? And what are your thoughts on how you'll do that for Toucan?
So I would love to figure this out, and I'm trying to like look at different solutions that exist out there, and I really haven't found that magic bullet, right? Because I would love to have our users who are asking us to invest in our product. Like it's not even just like, oh, maybe we should let them. Like they're begging us to let us in, and so I'm trying to figure out how could we do that. And I mean, maybe there's a market for a product like that of some founders that are ambitious that want to really build something that would attract some like hot tech companies, like with maybe fast, right? Like so much FOMO on Twitter. They have such a massive following. Like I'm sure tons of people would love to put their money in the company, but how can they make that happen? Because the way that rounds are structured, it doesn't necessarily leave the best opportunity for us as founders to make that happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause you're not getting a lot of like non-financial value from most of those customers. I think there needs to be some kind of like the way AngelList built the rolling fund to completely disrupt the VC model. There needs to be something similar like that for everyday users where it doesn't muddy up your cap table. You're able to allow, a small allocation for users to invest. I would love to see that.
Yeah, me too.
So a couple more questions for you. The first one is around just, internally self-reflecting. I was looking at your background. I know you're an athlete, so you're probably really competitive. But when you look inside, like, what do you think it is? What are the factors that just drive you to keep going? I think to become a founder, you have to be, super competitive and a little crazy, honestly. Like I would say, and a lot of the people I've talked to, which in a great way. But what do you think motivates you to keep going?
I'm glad you picked up on the athletic side. So I played competitive volleyball my whole life. I both indoor and beach volleyball. Just growing up in Los Angeles, you tend to be at the beach quite a lot. And I went to the Junior Olympics for both. Played Division I in college, and was pretty much on the path to going to the Olympics for both indoor and beach. Like I was very interested and excited and like training to make that happen. And I think I could have made that happen. Ended up getting injured, but that competitive side that I have has for sure transferred over to the workforce. Like, I am crazy in the sense that I would bet on myself any day, especially with the team that I'm building around me, to like take on anything. And it's why I've jumped over and over again from companies with really great salaries to like go to no salary and like completely unknown, where my friends and family think I'm absolutely insane, because both of my parents have worked at stable jobs their entire careers, the same company. And so for them looking at me, and even my other half, my fiance, he's been at the same company since graduation. And so I am the odd man out who's just continuing to bet on myself and really know that if I'm part of helping something happen, I can help make it be really great.
Yeah, I love that. I think that competitive juice, not everybody has it. So definitely cherish that for sure. Um, so a topic I like to get into as well is around wellness. So this is my like personal favorite topic. I think wellness is the most important thing, and I look at it like a stack. So I think nutrition, fitness, sleep, mindfulness, and this is kind of like a Twitter saying, but I've been looking at it like this for a long time, and I'm glad that everybody's kind of hopping on the train. So a couple questions around this. The first is, how do you think about wellness and how it plays a part in your daily life across some of those aspects?
Yeah. So being an athlete, I think that's transferred over to like as a founder. Like, you need to take care of yourself just like you would as you're training, because this is really crazy stuff. Like, happens every single day, all hours, and you're under intense pressure and a lot of going on at once. And so, like, to your point, I mean, and we have a lot of headspace DNA in us. It's not just like physical, go to the gym, workout every single day. It's like meditate. Like, I meditate in the morning, but we also do it as a team, completely optional, but we can. So I'm trying to transfer some of the things I'm doing myself and like giving other people the tools on our team as well to be able to do that. And I've just like the past few months been really fanatic about my morning and my night routines, and like starting to be like really regimented. Around like 10 p.m. I'm already asleep. Like, right before sleep, there's like no phones. I'm reading a book. Like 8 p.m., I'm trying to wean myself off of that. In the morning when I wake up, I don't look at my phone, and all notifications are turned off, and it's completely grayscaled, because I used to be completely addicted to email. But then I learned that email is really like other people's to-do list for me versus like my own to-do list, and like set up what are the 3 things that are going to move the needle for me versus doing a lot of small tasks every day. I think that hits on a lot of things, but I think the routine side and being diligent about making time for that health stack and like that wellness side is really important. Otherwise, it becomes really easy to be like, I'm too busy to go work out, or I'm too busy to find 10 minutes to meditate, which is also like one of the problems we're trying to solve with Toucan.
Totally. Yeah, you're hitting it from both sides. That's awesome.
Yeah.
How do you feel about your content diet? So I know you go on Twitter, you only tweet the once a day. So I'm assuming you try to curb social media as much as possible, but on the positive content side, like newsletters, books, what are you consuming routinely?
Yeah, so I'll do podcasts, or actually Clubhouse too, because I feel like I've been learning a lot from those conversations just when I'm walking, like outside walking my golden retriever Simba, trying to get some exercise in, and listening to something. So multitasking while I'm doing that. Twitter, like just 8 a.m., and then responding to people in DMs, user feedback in general. But I turn off all notifications on my socials to try to like really not do that. During the week, I've stopped watching Netflix and Hulu.
Oh no.
And different. Yeah, I know, it's crazy because I'm such a movie buff, but have replaced that with reading, and that's been really interesting. And I still watch movies on the weekends. I won't ever stop. I love them too much, but I think it's really helped as far as like just learning in general, and like keep trying to up leveling myself.
Yeah, totally. I mean, if you start winding down at 8 p.m., like there's not a lot of time for the TV shows and movies. That's what I'm realizing. I'm on a similar path.
Yeah, I love it. It is hard.
Yeah. All right, I got 3 more questions for you. So the first one is around exciting trends. So I imagine, as a founder, you're talking to other founders, you're getting exposed to all these cool things, and your investors are probably running stuff by you. So if you were to put a consumer hat on, or potentially an angel investor if you were running your own money, what are some trends or areas that you're super excited about for the next like 3 to 5 years?
One for sure, the extension side, like go-to-market extension product. Just so much inbound in my Twitter DMs of like other founders just like looking for advice, which is one of the reasons why we created the Slack channel. Like, I think there's going to be so many interesting use cases where there'll be billion-dollar companies built off of it, because like it's completely untapped. And investors are starting to look at it. Whether you want to bootstrap or fundraise, like I think that opportunity is available for people. I think too, the education piece. If you look at a lot of these massive companies that exist, they're a legacy at this point. Like even the number one player in the language learning space, Duolingo, has been around for over 10 years. Like that is a long time for not anyone really to come up and rise in the ranks before. And even like the big ones like Coursera and Udemy, like they're unicorns, billion-dollar companies, but also a lot of the tech is just digitizing the classroom. Like, is there something more innovative that we can really build? And even just beyond virtual classrooms with the trend of COVID, like there has to be something on the education side that gets people to learn, not just buy a product, but really learn and educate themselves and democratize access to on all of that end. And then just on the third side, I think that really interesting, like consumer tech social products. I think Clubhouse is really interesting audio experiment, because there's a lot of good and bad that has been coming with the app. But I think there's like, we've had Facebook, Instagram, Snap, Twitter, like the mainstays, and they've been there like on our phones for a really long time. But what are the new up and coming ones on that end?
Totally. Yeah, the Clubhouse. I'm fascinated to try Clubhouse. I haven't been. I don't think they've rolled it out publicly, right? It's still like in private beta.
I'll send you an invite.
Okay,
I'll
that'd be
hook you
awesome.
up.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
All right. So second question. So two more for you. So this is a new one, but I think I'm gonna ask every single person this. So,
Okay.
you're a founder, so you're used to customer feedback. So I'm gonna get your feedback on this. So on some of you listen to podcasts, I'm assuming, because you're on this one and you mentioned it. What are some of the things that your favorite podcasts do to keep you coming back? Is it the guests? Is it the content? Is it the length? Is it the way they promote? Like, I'm trying to find new ideas to help kind of up my game.
Such a good question. Okay. Guests for sure. Because like you really, when I go to podcasts, sometimes I like go on a trend of like wanting to learn everything about someone. So I go to all the different ones that have had that specific guest. So that's me specifically, like that trend. Any key trend in tech that's happening that like people want to know more and like learn, like why the heck is this trending? Like when Quibi was a thing, right? Like months ago. No hate to Quibi, they're an LA tech company. Like hope that they can figure out something, but
R.I.P. Quibi.
I know, so sad. But there's like trends happening that people want to dissect and learn more about. I think that would be awesome. And you did a great job too. So I appreciate you even asking this question.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you. I mean, I love hosting. Like the conversations are really fun for me, and we're getting steady increase in engagement. So it's a good sign, but always looking for new techniques and tactics. So, all right, last question. So we asked this one to every guest. So I'm pumped to get your take on this one. So this is the startup manifesto. This is kind of what the show's known for. So if you had to write a startup manifesto with 5 of the most important key lessons or pitfalls to avoid when starting out, what would they be?
First one, hands down, don't even have to think about it, is co-founders. Like making sure, one, if you're going to have co-founders, like you know them, you've worked with them, they add value, you respect them. Because for so many reasons, but it is so important to build that team around you. And I would actually recommend for you to try to get one co-founder. I have 2. There's just so much to do in a startup that it is close to impossible to do it all by yourself. And for the solo founders out there, like power to you, because there is a lot you're getting done. But not just from like a workload standpoint, just bouncing things off of them, right? Like getting feedback in these crazy high growth environments. It might not be something you want to talk to a team member about, but a co-founder you could really rely on during all of that craziness. Two, like decide really early on if you want to bootstrap or if you want to fundraise. Like they are very different types of companies, and both can be extremely successful. But I wouldn't get, if you have started on the path of bootstrapping, like getting allured into the fundraising side, like could be a death trap for some companies, just because there's different set of expectations. And honestly, the big numbers in the press, it's not all glory. You have to give up equity in order to like get those numbers. And that's not actually, I feel like, isn't a goal. Like you want to build a profitable, sustainable business that's a massive, iconic company. So how is the way you can do that with giving up the least amount of equity possible, right? Three, like team, but beyond co-founders. Like team makes or break you. Like if you're doing something right, there's going to be 5 other copycats in the market, like just trying to. But your team can out execute anyone if you have the right people in place. And that's not just the tech side of like the skill set, the hard skills, but also the soft skills. Because if you have one complete asshole in there and it's this like small, tight knit group, it's going to sour everything. Doing great so far. Number 4, mentors. So a lot of our strategic angel investors, I consider mentors for me because they've been through this already. Like founder of Honey, founder of Headspace, founder of Prey, like founder of Giphy, like these big companies that have been through everything, that have so many learnings under their belts around already. And like I can go to those founders anytime, any questions that I have, and like they actually reach out to me, making sure I'm okay, like in a good headspace, like having that really great relationship that you can really relate to, because nothing is like being a founder. Like you don't really train for this, and a lot of people don't understand what this experience is like. And then 5 for startup manifesto, I would just say like distribution. Like you could perfect your product all day, but if you don't figure out how to get it in the hands of people, like it's not going to work. And it's one of the reasons why the day we had the idea, we had the ugliest version of Toucan, but we put it in the wild to get feedback, to start getting users, to start growing, even though it was like 5 users that one day. That was getting started, and then figuring out how to eventually 10x and keep scaling to get that massive hockey stick growth. But really starting somewhere and figuring out how to distribute the product.
It's a great point on the distribution. Well, first of all, thank you for that list. That's a great list. We'll definitely clip that. The distribution is so true. I heard on a podcast, someone said, first-time founders focus on product, second-time founders focus on distribution. So it's so true.
I love it.
Yeah. All right. So before I let you go, I just want to acknowledge you for a second. So, I do this with all my guests. Obviously, I'm hosting and a participant in the conversation, but I'm also like a huge fan and just a supporter. And I think, something I took away from the conversation with you is you're really optimistic. Like you have really good energy, but I think sometimes people confuse that for weakness, and you're not. You're super competitive, tactical, the space really well in and out. But I think complementing that with like an overall great positive vibe is pretty rare. So I'm inspired by that. And hopefully anybody who takes the hour to listen is as well. I just want to thank you so much for coming on, and I'll continue to be a huge fan of Toucan moving forward.
Thank you, Kyle. That's so kind. I really appreciate that. And actually, I really agree with you. It's something that's been with me my whole life. Like I am extremely optimistic and excited, and I hope that comes through in the screen, but also fiercely competitive, and I'm here to win.
It does for sure. Awesome. Taylor Nieman, founder of Toucan. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks, Kyle.